Good morning, let's start over. It's so good to be here. And as I was saying, for me, it's always Sacred Activism Sunday. It's always Sacred Activism every day of the week. And for me, Sacred Activism is that inner work that we do that expands us so that however we're showing up with greater light. Hello? And greater goodness, and being a greater aspect of Spirit and God coming forward in the world. And right now it's December. I don't have to carry this, I can move around. It's December, and it's that time of year in the Northern Hemisphere where we're at what we consider our darkest point in terms of the whole cosmos and where we live on the planet. We have much less light during the day and much more darkness at night. And also in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a time where almost everywhere in the world across time, humanity has celebrated the return of light. And so we know that in December that almost every faith tradition has something going on that is about that return of light. And as I came in and sat here this morning, I realized we talk about the darkness and the light, and yet in some ways, at this time of the year, with the sun being lower in the sky, even in this room, we are actually more flooded with light. That gift of light is already here right now as we sit here. So the light is always present. We know that in terms of our faith. We know that in terms of our beliefs. And yet here we have it. Let's dig into that a little bit deeper. So today is about our relationship with light. That's what we're talking about today. And when I said, unexpected things have been happening today, I knew it was Power Talk Sunday, and that's a small window. And then just as I was getting ready to shower, the phone rang, and it was Reverend Brian, and he said, I don't think I can make it in today. I'm not feeling that well. He's okay. But there's a lot of stuff going around. And in this time of giving, this season of giving, sometimes the best gift that we can give others is not bringing some things, right? So he said, can you pinch hit for me? Okay. So thank you for being with me to do this today. So I rarely wear props, but I am. So I want to talk about our relationship with light, and there's so many ways that we can go after this. From my art background, what comes to mind right away, spiritually what comes to mind is shadow work. And that's sort of one of those 4-letter words. It's actually, 6 letters? But because shadow work is something we tend to shy away from. But I want to talk about from the art realm, because in the art realm, bless you, a lot of what happens in art is contrast. And for those who contrast has a way of defining us. So does anybody know about Rembrandt? Or familiar with Rembrandt? He's one of the classics in Europe, and a lot of his work is very dark because he was playing with a technique that has this Italian word, chiaroscuro. It's sort of a tongue twister. And so what he was working with was contrast. Most of his work was dark, if not outright black, with very carefully orchestrated uses of light. It could be that the whole foreground of a person was dark with just that trace of light, like on my sweater, for those of you who can see that contrast. Or if I do it over here for this side of the room. That's chiaroscuro. But what it does is it defines the boundary. It defines the form. And I think in spirituality we could say that it's where we are based in light with our thoughts, or in darkness, it can be defining of who we are and what we're bringing, right? So it's we're going to talk about our relationship with light, which is also our relationship with life and God, because who is the source of all being, the source of all creation, is God, is spirit. And what do we usually associate with God and spirit? Life, yes, it is that from which all life has come, but also we always refer to it as light. And light being that which is most high, most powerful, it's ineffable. But we don't celebrate darkness like we celebrate life. We don't aspire to darkness as we do light. And so, I may be referring to my notes a little bit more than usual today. That's where we're going to go today. Work is, as I said earlier, something we tend to avoid because a lot of time that may include experiencing some pain, some awkwardness, right? Confusion, being called out or embarrassed or whatever. And so where I had started the inspiration for my power talk today was something that I saw on Facebook. Now, admittedly, I am rarely on Facebook. 2 years ago, I had an experience with Facebook when I was traveling where there was an overreach into my privacy, and it was through my phone, and at that point I said, that's it. Facebook went off my phone, and I've just really sort of stayed out of that realm. But I did go on recently, and there was this, there's so much interesting that shows up in Facebook, and you can never predict what it's going to be, right? And so somebody that I know that works at Unity Village had posted this image, and there are even churches in our area that have these sort of old-timey signs. They look like white stripes, right, of plastic, because those are the tracks for the letters. And they sit outside. And it's always amazing how they come up with phrases that are just like, well, that is so clever because it's so succinct, it's so short, but it's like, boom, it really has a punch. And this was from the Welsh Church in Melbourne, Australia. And this is what it said. Now, this is a little deeper than most of them. It said, at the end of the day, I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. Whoa. Now, I saw this, and this just sort of took over my day in terms of sitting with this. At the end of the day, I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude. Now, it uses the phrase who. And I think immediately we go to the bigger realm and all the racial equity and all the injustice in the world and so forth, and how we might be called forward in that regard to question, am I excluding, who am I excluding, who am I including? But I went somewhere else with it that I think is foundational. And it is part of the shadow or the sacred activism work that we do, and I think what we do in shadow work as well. And that is to look at what we are including or excluding. So in any point when we're showing up, am I including my fear, my doubt, my shame, my insecurity? And when I do that, what is that doing for me in terms of how I'm showing up? Am I excluding my fear, my doubt, my shame, my insecurity, my anger, whatever, and instead including my divinity, including my power, being self-empowered in that moment? What a difference that makes. And it's all about our relationship to light and light. Now, I was thinking too about, in the surgical arena, there are floodlights everywhere. And I was thinking too about, have any of you had this experience where you're sound asleep and you have your own way of waking up that's gentle? but somebody comes in and throws the light on, and it's that just shock and rude awakening. Sometimes that happens where the light comes at us unexpectedly, and it's just this major wallop. Instead of the nice, I had a roommate in college. I lived 1 year in an international house, and I had a Chinese roommate. And first day when I moved in, I was a little nervous about what's this going to be like, and I had these preconceptions that Asian women were very demure and very quiet. And does she wear white shoes and white anklets and silly stuff like that were cultural profiles and biases, right? And as I walked up to the room, because she had moved in before I got there, there was a chime on the door, and as I opened the door, there were the white shoes and the white ankle socks. And I freaked out. It's like, oh no, those worst fears are coming true, right? But then I saw her sheets. Purple elephants, turquoise monkeys, all this wild jungle stuff. And I thought, oh, look at me, right? I'm afraid of the white ankle socks, but if she's sleeping in these sheets, I know we're going to be great together, and we were. We were, right? And we're still friends all these years later. But she showed me her alarm clock, and her alarm clock, when it first went off, would go ding, 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 and I was laughing hysterically. That's going to wake you up? Really? That would never wake me up. Now there's a Pavlovian story coming here. Because the thing was, with that little ding, ding, for about 15, 20 seconds or so, if you didn't wake up, within a week, ding, I was awake, right? The light comes to us in so many ways. And what is our relationship with it? What are we including and excluding? I started into that moment including all these stereotypes that were based on Hollywood, that were based, I didn't know Chinese people before then, but I was filled with all these media stereotypes, right? I found out, because I was willing to see something differently, I could have a very different experience with this person. And this is true everywhere, is it not? Mm-hmm. When we open to the light. Rumi says our wounds and I think we could include, Rumi, excuse me for updating you, our prejudices or our preconceptions are where the light gets in. But we have to be willing to be vulnerable, and we have to be willing to be in that uncomfortable and even painful place at times. Now, I'm going to admit, I stepped into it twice this week, and it was not happy. It was not. And the thing was, on one of them, I really thought I was bringing my best self forward. And then found out afterwards I really wasn't, that something else was needed. And I forgot to bring my pause button, darn it, that day. That pause button that says, whoa, stop here, wait a minute, regroup for a second, and let's shift how we're showing up. And it happened to be in a conversation with somebody who was going through something. And the way the conversation started, I just sort of drifted into my professional mode, which is, just sort of get the lay of the land here and what's going on, sort through the pieces internally, and be helpful in terms of strategizing or problem solving. And how often do we do that with people who are in pain or in conflict or need some type of care and support, and we go right away into detect and problem solve, when that wasn't what was called for. But that pause button, I didn't pick up the signal soon enough. And only too late did I realize, darn, I did it again, something I've been working on not to do, and that is, I went that route instead of just being present and holding that space for the person and realizing that may be helpful in a couple of days or weeks or somewhere down the road, but in this moment, it's not what I should be bringing. And I was so upset by it that I went home and I indulged in some emotional eating before I got the signal, oh yeah, let's journal this, right? But the light, you know, it's like, my relationship with the light in that moment was how it was stirring my emotions, but what's that inner work that's mine to do? And so things going on in the world, we get triggered by. And some of us go, you know, I don't want to look at the outer world. I don't want to pay attention to what's going on out there. So much of it sounds political when it's really not. But the real work, and this is what we do in sacred activism meetings, is that we go, wait a minute, okay, so that's the label of what triggered. But what's the inner work? And what's been learned in terms of hate and anger is a lot of times what triggers us is something within us that we don't like. But we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to do the shadow work. And instead what we do is we project that self-displeasure on others so we can hate, you know, we can put it out there so that we don't have to deal with it. Oh my, is that a different story about what's going on in the world? If each and every one of us are doing that, you know, in terms of the season of giving and not wanting to infect somebody, what are we doing when we do that? We're giving a gift that maybe isn't the greatest gift, right? So we have to be vulnerable enough and willing enough to do that shadow work, however uncomfortable it is. And to really own it. You know, like one of the situations now is, and I know this sounds like a random leap, is all the issue about the plastic in the world and how much of a disposable society some of the Western cultures have been. And we see not only the pictures of all the refuge that is washing up on beaches in other parts of the world, but how it is becoming ingested and actually killing off wildlife and fish. And so there was a Forbes article this weekend about how Europe has decided they're moving towards let me get this right. They're moving to ban single-use plastics. Whoa, what a sea change that is, and pun intended there, right? How would that shift each and every one of us if suddenly we moved away from single-use plastic? That revolutionizes the food and grocery industry. It revolutionizes so much of our delivery systems, but invites us to have a different relationship with the light and the life that sustains the planet, right? So our relationship with light and the shadow work is that the shadows are whatever is in that darkness. I mean, I stand here and I see my shadow, but if I stand here, I don't see it, right? And we each have that. And even though I see my shadow there, there's, in terms of the physical realm, it's like, oh, that's just my shadow. But in terms of the life we live and lead, we're not always tuned into what our shadow is. And so what clues us in, just like Rembrandt, is where that light comes in to start giving us a hint of, oh, is that the shape? Is that the content? Is that what I want to bring forth? Maybe it served me in the past, but is it still serving me and everybody else, right? So I invite you to become friends, self-compassionately so, with that shadow. Like when I stepped into it this week, I had to be in self-forgiveness. And the other thing that happened to me this week is that I took somebody's advice, suggestion on how to phrase something that I put out publicly. And immediately what came back was wrong choice. And it was out. And I was able to redo it, but in that moment, I realized, what had I included when I did that? I included a little wrinkle of self-doubt. I decided that somebody else had the better idea compared to my authenticity and where it felt it should go. And yet, even there, I was sort of susceptible to that suggestion because I was doubting my authenticity of which way to go. That's what I included. So look what happened as soon as I put that out. Ouch. So I ask you and I invite you to realize that, you know what, that shadow work can be challenging, disruptive, confusing, painful, yes. But the other side of doing that work is a deeper faith, more inner strength, and more on this authenticity. It's the way that we, by doing that inner work, can show up as light workers in the world. And I know everyone who's in this room is wanting to do more of that. And if it feels like too much, come talk to your ministers, your practitioners, or therapists to help you sort through that in that moment of intensity. And by the way, always remember to bring your pause button with you. Okay? So please join me in this affirmative prayer. Oh, big breath together. We come together in the oneness of being one, recognizing that power, that presence that is absolute, unconditional, infinite, and eternal. That which is most high and most pure, that which is infinite wisdom, infinite grace, and love that is healing and always pouring forward without measure, without condition. It is that from which we have come. It is that within which we live. It is the light of our awareness. It is the light of the life we are. And it is that in which we are all one. Not just people on the planet, but all one with every point of creation. And in some manner, we are one with every situation, where we know that God is present everywhere, in every moment, in every situation, in everyone, and everywhere active. And so our relationship with this light is that we face it. We open ourselves, we let it be our radiance, our wisdom, our guidance. And we accept that that which we celebrate and know is far more than each of us individually is, far more than whatever that condition is that's slamming us, far more is our truth and is everywhere present. We simply turn to it and we work with it. Thank you, God, for showing me what is mine to do today. Even if it doesn't feel like a convenient or comfortable ride. I accept this is mine to do. And I accept that it is right and perfect that I be doing it right now. And I accept that God is always for me, with me, in me, as me, through me. So I allow myself to do this work. I allow myself to face my shadow. And I allow myself to be transformed. So that what I'm facing now is that investment in the greater me, the deeper faith, the greater empowerment, and being the light in life that this world is so clearly calling for. And so I say yes. And I trust that I am divinely guided through every phase of whatever it is I'm facing. I trust in my principles. I trust in the principles of science of mind. And I trust that there is a greater good that I am, that is mine to bring forth and gift the world with by doing this work. And so I accept, I allow, gracefully and willingly. I partner with Spirit through it. And for this, however awkward, awful it may feel, I know is the greater good. And I say thank you. And so it is.